Right. Welcome to Should Dying Languages Be Excluded from the List of Bible Translation Needs? Kwak'wela case study being presented by Dr. Joost Pikkert. Joost is the program director for the MA in Translation of Scripture at Canada Institute of Linguistics, just outside of Vancouver, which I'm also from. And that's a competency-based program meant to prepare translation consultants primarily outside of North America. Joost also has experience in Indonesia, and as a colleague, I'll just say he asks wonderful questions. He's a great conversationalist and a really good listener. So thanks, Joost. Please present.
Thanks, Larry. Can everybody hear me? All right. I actually get shots in my vocal cords that allow me to talk. So if I sound like the Godfather, if you don't pay attention, I'll take you out back later on. This topic became of interest to me first when I was in Indonesia, because there's so many languages that are on the verge of dying in Indonesia. And it became more interested to me when I moved back to Canada. And I kind of did a paradigm shift on this, and you're getting my latest iteration on where I landed. Languages are disappearing at an alarming rate, and Bible translations that began over 20 years ago can today sometimes be read by only a handful of people because the young people in those languages are no longer fluent in their heritage language. Many parents view their heritage language as inadequate in preparing their children for the modern world, with parents looking to schools to provide their children with alternate linguistic identities that better position their children to achieve well-being in the world. In contrast to those who view nurturing alternative linguicities with low vitality language communities as a positive development, my friendship with Brodie Naknakim, an indigenous missionary to his own Kwak'wela people in Canada, triggered a rethink of this issue. Are you guys hearing a reverb, or is it just me? If you don't hear it, then okay. All right, thanks, Larry. In contrast to those who view nurturing alternative linguistic identities with low vitality language communities as a positive development, my friendship with Brodie Naknakim, an indigenous missionary to his Kwak'wela people in Canada, triggered a rethink. His people number approximately 4,000 and have a language vitality of 7 on the EGID scale. For those of you who don't know the EGID scale, that is a terrible score. The Kwak'wela language was largely obliterated by the misguided attempts of churches and governments to replace it with English. The question driving this paper, which arose in my discussions with Brodie, is the role that language vitality scores play in determining whether a language is allocated to the likely no need category for a Bible translation. This paper proposes and attempts to answer the following questions that arose in our work amongst the Kwak'wela. Are there ethical reasons why language is currently classified as threatened or shifting on the EGID scale, or as reported by Progress Bible, need to be reconsidered for Bible translation? Is it possible that threatened and shifting languages may need a Bible translation to effectively mediate the work of God, including God's healing touch, even if there is a well-understood Bible in the community which is used by the church? If the answer to the above two questions is yes, should the church explore language revitalization through Bible translation as an expression of caring for people groups who have suffered a loss of language vitality? Let's take a look at the problem. First of all, there's conflicting language vitalities between the Kwak'wela and I feel the Bible translation movement. I realized I was dealing with conflicting worldviews when over and over again I heard Brody and his Canadian First Nations colleagues refer to their traditional territories as sacred territories and their heritage language as our sacred language. Sacred appeared to be understood by them as set apart by the Creator, believing that their languages were given to them at Babel by God and would be represented in heaven. They used the rationale that they made a biblical case for Bible translation in their shifting community based on A, their cosmological, and B, their teleological perspectives, which were largely drawn from the Bible. Did I share these perspectives? How, I asked myself, should I respond to the likely death of a language for a people who perceive their language as a sacred gift from the Creator? Was it worth expending the effort to provide a translation to the elders when the language was rated as 7 on the EGOT scale and classified on the website as likely no need? As Christian linguists, I wondered, do we have the right to use our social linguistic data to conclude that God's appointed times for low language vitality groups were in the past, especially when these groups were putting valiant efforts into revitalizing their language? I struggle with God's view of language and the presuppositions embodied in the Bible translation movement's formulas, directing who was relegated to the likely no need group. To be included as a language under the category remaining translation need, the language needs to be, quote unquote, vital enough for communities to sustain and benefit from translation work, but they do not have any current engagement. However, to be, quote unquote, vital enough, the language vitality needed to reach a minimum level of 6B or stronger on the EGOT scale. Using these two criteria, over 1,200 of the world's languages were practically precluded from consideration of a Bible translation. The Kwak'wela, along with all but 2 other First Nation languages in Canada, are precluded based on their poor language vitality score. I did not have the heart to tell Brody that my primary research arm of the Bible translation movement had calculated that the Kwak'wela likely had no need for a Bible based on statistics, and that these decisions were already published on the internet to guide the decisions of the Bible translation movement. First of all, I think we have to understand the benefits and limits of scientifically based language research. The sense of disequilibrium led me to unpack the benefits and limits of the scientific and positivistic philosophical basis that undergirds the collection and analysis of language survey data used by Progress Bible and acted upon by Wycliffe Global Alliance. No one measures, quote unquote, the sacred perceptions of a language, or quote unquote, the spiritual and emotional potential healing benefits of a language revitalization through Bible translation for these people. It ignores language policy shifts being considered by national governments that may affect language vitality in the future. I could find no record of languages moving from scripture likely no need category to need Bible translation to start. There appeared an inevitable slide to likely no need. The dangers of allowing decisions on which communities could best benefit from a Bible translation to be solely driven by our standard social linguistic data categories are best echoed by Albert Einstein. I am not a positivist, he said. Positivism states that what cannot be observed does not exist. This conception is scientifically indefensible, for it is impossible to make valid affirmations of what people can or cannot observe. One would have to say only what we observe exists, which is false. In the same way, reasons for a Bible translation among low vitality languages may not be observed and measured from data retrieved through a language survey. The Kwak'wela concept of the sacredness of their territories and languages, a non-positivistic perspective that relies on unobservable reasons related to cosmology and teleology, hides in the shadows of their rationale for needing a Bible translation. These reasons should be entertained if our theology includes ascribing value to all God has created, including languages, and if our teleological perspective asserts that he values the representation of all languages in heaven. The Bible does not reduce the reasons for why we should or should not do something to strictly observable phenomena, i.e., we fight not against flesh and blood, the whole concept of love. Likewise, we need to be careful not to exclude the important concerns raised by biblical teleology, Christian ethics, Christian worldview, the nature of the mission of God, and the fact that governments are recognizing the need for language revitalization as an ethical mandate for low vitality languages in countries like Canada, Indonesia, and Australia. What strikes me in Progress Bible's pronouncement or in Wycliffe Global's Alliance nomenclature of likely no need is the sense of pessimism. It presumes language communities are traveling the predetermined path to language loss after 6B or 7 level has been reached. How many languages are resurveyed after they reach a 6A or 7 for the cause of Bible translation? If continual resurvey is not done, and I could find no evidence that any of these low vitality languages in Canada were being resurveyed, are we unconsciously contributing to language loss? Is it time we factor in the reality that communities, governments, universities, and multilateral agencies have begun investing in low vitality languages? Are we leaving ourselves open to the continued critique that we don't care what happens to minority peoples who have experienced extreme pain because of church-sponsored language programs in residential schools? Could Progress Bible's approach actually be understood as a potential catalyst for language loss? When we make lists of languages excluded from remaining need, we are by default redirecting money to other purposes and taking these languages off life support. Is this the ethical reputation for which the Bible translation movement wants to be known? Is making exclusionary lists of likely no need encouraging language loss? I would suggest publishing language vitality data, but avoiding decisions on whether a language should be excluded from the remaining lead list based on social linguistic data presently driving translation decisions. We should avoid positioning the Bible translation movement as a catalyst for language death by avoiding involvement. If the Bible translation movement wants to couple scientific data with a directive regarding the need for Bible translation, should we couple it with the category Bible translation for real language revitalization? This avoids projecting the sense of inevitable determinism of language death for low vitality languages, which governments around the world are realizing is ethically difficult to defend. We need to collect social linguistic data necessary for decisions based on the related type of language revitalization that may be compatible with the Bible translation movement. As modern efforts have indicated, languages can be revitalized and resurrected. This hope is driving Welsh, Lillooet, Kwak'wela, and many other First Nations languages in Canada. Even the revitalization of Hebrew as a quote-unquote sacred language is a perfect example. We should embrace hope, actively working with each of these communities in the knowledge that God is interested in not only having these languages represented in heaven, but also on earth as a foretaste of his redemptive work. Remember the Lord's Prayer regarding our desire for his will to be done on earth as it is in heaven. I think we need to develop a Christian worldview regarding language diversity. What is our presupposition regarding God's purpose for creating the diversity of languages? God did not introduce language diversity in the Garden of Eden, since the population of 2 made it unnecessary. However, his intention to create language diversity had its genesis before space and time, but was actualized after sufficient numbers of people existed in space and time to warrant multilingualism. Interestingly, arguments that root the genesis of language diversity in genetic mutation have never been proved. Even chimpanzees raised in human families don't begin to use language like humans. At some point, The chimps that learned language needed to be taught by other creative beings, which in these cases were humans and not other chimps. Based on available evidence, we can reasonably hypothesize, based on the scientific evidence, that either A, another creative being taught the first beings who use language, or B, a superior creative communicative being created the inherent ability for humans to use or generate a language. A reasonable hypothesis is that the initial language, or perhaps language families, came from a superior communicative being that wanted communication to be part of the human repertoire and gave it to a specific human community. This is possibly, along with the physical creation, one of the greatest cosmological apologetics for the existence of a creator. Each language community, regardless of its vitality, points beyond itself to something greater, a creator or a designer. And what does this community do with the gift of language? They share not only concrete information necessary for physical life and survival, like other animals, but abstract ideas, invent songs about love, develop mythologies about spirits, craft psychological theories to understand themselves. We not only let our community know where food is, much like simple bees, but also tell jokes for fun, stories that help us empathize with others, and put words to music to lift our souls. This is a miracle. Each little low vitality language is a testament to the Creator. Each language logically warrants belief in a Creator. When asked why we would translate the Bible into low vitality language, it gives the church an opening to testify about our belief in a creative designer who likes to communicate with us in different ways. Do we want to erase one of these amazing languages that are a testimony to the glory of our Creator? I am reminded of Albert Einstein, who aptly gave this parable on languages. We are in the position of a little child, he said, entering a huge library whose walls are covered to the ceiling with books in many different tongues. The child knows that someone must have written those books. It does not know who or how. It does not understand the languages in which they are written. The child notes a definite plan in the arrangement of the books, a mysterious order which it does not comprehend, but only dimly suspects. That, it seems to me, is the attitude of the human mind, even the greatest and most cultured, towards God, said Einstein. Does the BT movement want to see the elimination of 12,000 of these books that point to our designer, all because of intentional, benign neglect? Let's take a look at language diversity as hinting at God's teleological purpose. If God valued language just to carry the message of salvation, he would not necessarily need to represent them all in heaven. The renewal of languages in the new heaven and new earth mirrors the renewal of the rest of creation. The languages used in heavenly worship are not decided on the number of speakers, the EGID scale, or the amount of scriptures available to multilingual speakers in another language. It appears that in heaven, all languages are of equal value. The Bible translation movement needs to once again embrace the reality that the preservation of language is a part of Christian ethic. Mark Liederbach and Evan Lenoe define Christian ethics as follows. It is about maximally adoring God and rendering to him all that he is due from all that he has made. And it is about our doing so both individually and corporately, end of quote. If we hold, like the Kwak'wela, that every language is a communal gift from God, represents an aspect of his glory, and accept that every language has an ultimate teleology to be used to glorify him in heaven, we are hard-pressed to exclude any language from being worthy of development and revitalization efforts. From God's aesthetic perspective versus positivistic, all languages are treated like a priceless piece of art and given equal exposure in heaven. We need to treat endangered languages like endangered species and work to protect them because they represent God's creative glory. Let's take a look Why else God created a diversity of language as an antidote to godless exploitation? The story of the Tower of Babel is God's narrative of why he created a diversity of languages as an antidote to humanity's drift to godless exploitation of the underclass. According to Dr. Boyce, the royal and priestly class lorded it over everyone else, exploiting the underclass to build a mammoth ziggurat for centralized worship, undermining the worship of the traditional creator God. The new religion, led by a type of Brahmin caste of priests, was meant to control people's spiritual lives. The traditional system where the creator God was at the apex of worship was being replaced by a Babylonian zodiac-like system of worship centered at the top of the ziggurat that reached to the heavens. In a nutshell, this type of worship was driven by a mechanistic worldview that viewed the universe like cosmic machinery operated largely devoid of divine guidance and control. The role of the priests was to guide parishioners and how to position themselves to benefit their life situation. The multiplication of languages at Babel stopped this wholesale drift to a godless, mechanistic, exploitative worldview and culture. People scattered from this central location and went to other parts of the world. In their travels, they took with them their traditional pre-Babel worldview of a creator God to whom they could pray, now in their new language, and from whom they could expect blessing. As the 12-volume anthropological work by Dr. Wilhelm Schmidt, Der Ursprung der Gottsidee, expressed, proved that the earliest human societies, even those considered primitive, continue to possess a belief in a single high God who is the benevolent creator of the world and with whom later religions often had a distant, if fragmented, relationship. This God, instead of being exploitative, is benevolent and expects humanity to be as well. The salvation of belief in the creator amongst the most far-flung cultures was accomplished through the miracle of multilingualism. The Tower of Babel was God's antidote to self-idolatry and exploitation by the upper classes of society. Every cultural group tends to prioritize itself and make statements aggrandizing itself out of proportion to reality. We all have an inherent bias that our own culture, language, and worldview are slightly superior to others. My own people have a saying, if you're not Dutch, you're not much. By nurturing diverse language communities, we can be confronted by self-idolatry, racism, and ethnocentrism, dangers inherent in monocultural societies. If we passively stand by as linguistic minorities are disempowered, are we encouraging the likelihood of greater self-idolatry, the exploitation of people of low vitality languages, and ethnocentrism among the more powerful dominant languages and peoples of the world? It is interesting that the two largest language communities in the world, English and Mandarin Chinese, are in the global battle trying to impose their worldview on the rest of the world, and they are also accused by many of the smaller nations of being exploitative, oppressive, and racist. Finally, let's take a look at language vitality as a means to enter the sacred space that feels like home. Historically, Canada's First Nations people were forced to adapt English and French by both government and church out of utilitarian motives. This has resulted in a horrible witness for the church. Had the church invested in a multilingual approach to indigenous languages, the First Nations would be much more open to hearing the message of the gospel today. We should learn from this lesson and pay careful attention to how we position ourselves for the long-term reception of the gospel, past 2025, in low vitality language communities. What if Bible translation in low vitality languages has less to do with the communication specific propositions connected to the gospel and more to do with ushering people into a place where those propositions could be heard? What if the religious language of one's colonial abusers keeps one from hearing God's message of healing? If one's heritage language has culturally predisposed people to expect God to communicate with them, even if it is poorly understood? In these cases, a multilingual Bible may be needed to A, convey propositions, but also B, assist people into God's presence. It appears amongst many First Nations people that their heritage language predisposes them to the possibility that the Creator may be communicating uniquely with them. They more naturally enter into a sacred space expecting to hear from the Creator through their heritage language. This escape from the mundane, pain-invested natural world to divine space through language is not unique. The Dalai Lama, along with Tibetan Buddhist priests, they pray in classical Tibetan from the 12th century, not in modern Tibetan. In Hinduism, religious space is created by songs, chants, prayers, and scriptures written in Sanskrit, a language just as dead as Sumerian. Muslims pray in 7th century classical Arabic, even though Arabic has changed a great deal since the time of the Prophet Muhammad. Greek Orthodox Christians still celebrate the Mass in the same Koine Greek in which the New Testament was written. Why are these classical languages invoked? Because they are considered sacred, and by using them, worshippers perceive themselves to be entering into the sacred space in which the divine works. As Bible translators, we are concerned to ensure that not only the propositions of the scriptures be accurately stated, but that the community can move into a space where the scriptures can be heard. This may require low vitality communities to have multilingual Bibles, possibly in multiple scripts. Kwak'wela Christians have also framed the need for a Bible translation under the rubric of restoring the image of God in them as a community, since language is perceived as part of their sacred identity. During funerals, Kwak'wela is expected to be spoken as one enters the journey to the Creator, the ultimate transition from the natural world to the numinous, transcendent divine space where they will meet the Creator. It communicates peace, comfort, and the grace of the Creator. Convinced that God gave First Nations their sacred languages at Babel, and that the Kwak'wela sense of self and the Kwak'wela language are inseparably intertwined with the image of God in them, they assert the need for language revitalization as key to engendering spiritual healing as God restores his image in them communally. In this space, God is anticipated to work through the language he gave them. A First Nations totem pole carver voiced to me that he wanted the Bible in his language, one he did not speak fluently because, quote unquote, it would help my people to pray. For him, like many First Nations people who speak fluent English, language is a sacred component to enter into communion with the divine. It shapes their understanding of God's image in them, expresses their identity as God would want it expressed in his multi-ethnic presence. I'm glad I'm late so I can go a little late. I'm glad I'm last, I can go a little late. There's the ethics of deciding where to place the burden of proof on deciding which languages are listed as needing a Bible translation. Where do we put the burden of proof on who should decide who needs a Bible translation? It should definitely not be driven by positivistic business models. I believe it is beyond the wisdom of any of us to create a list entitled Likely No Need if there are still speakers of that language alive and where the desire to preserve that language, even by a handful of people, is expressed. The Bible translation movement should pull itself away from an understanding that the Bible is just a vehicle for gospel proposition. It is more than that. If we as Christians can agree that every language shows the glory of God, points to our Creator, is valued in the heavens, provides us with an antidote to self-centeredness, racism, exploitation, and that all languages will be singing to the glory of God in heaven, it is hard to come to any conclusion that any language should be listed as likely no need if there are still speakers who can facilitate its revival. Historical precedents warn us that avoiding translating the Bible into low vitality languages may have horrible long-term consequences for the witness of the church down the road. We need to ensure we don't repeat this historical error. I propose we go from likely no need to rephrasing it as language revitalization through Bible translation. This paper proposes the change of the classification. This paper also proposes that it's time our Bible translation training programs include a course on Bible translation for language revitalization. The church needs to integrate language revitalization tools to both lead people into the sacred space to meet God and convey the propositional truth of God's message. In Kwak'wela, we are presently working on a graphic Bible app where the text bubbles will switch between English and Kwak'wela, and the Kwak'wela will hopefully also be supported with audio. It is the dream of Kwak'wela Christian missionaries that this Bible app will be used as a basis to create plays and OBT-like activities that help revitalize their language. In conclusion, we need to remember that when we collect data, we engage in science. When we use that data to make decisions that direct us to make the statements on languages needing a Bible translation, we are no longer engaging in science, but in missions and economics. As we look for a balance between these two concerns, I draw inspiration from my work with Dr. Kenneth Pike, the first president of SIL, who was nominated 15 times for the Nobel Peace Prize. In his book, Talk, Thought, and Thing, The Emic Road Towards Conscious Knowledge, he advises the following. And the book is full of convictions. Conviction 4.2. If we must put a person in a context along with logic, I would put the value of person above that of logic. Our basic unproven presuppositions do not come from logic itself, but from persons living in society and in the physical world. It is this value system of putting people above the logic of data that drove God to send his son, someone of infinite value, to die not for friends, but for enemies. If we deem it worthy to preserve the works of mediocre artists in our museums, is the beauty of a language not much worthier of preservation? And if languages are worth preserving, then would it not behoove us to also enjoy understanding how each language might represent the Creator's thoughts, intentions, and poetry, to enrich ourselves as humanity by studying and translating this artwork? We need to steward low vitality languages like the rest of God's creation, because they show the glory of God, heal the people of God, fight the evils of sin, and provide the linguistic sacred home for the ethnic groups we will meet in heaven. In the new heaven and new earth, let us never be forced to sheepishly hang our heads and acknowledge that at some deluded time on earth, we deemed our Christian sibling language unworthy to be used in a Bible translation. Thank you.
Short amount of time for some public questions. I realize that 5 minutes till 5 o'clock. So if any of you need to leave, feel free to comfortably get up and leave. But if you want to stay and ask any questions and partake in that, feel free to come up to the mic and ask a question.
I'm Mark Tabor, representing Global Partnerships in Indonesia. Thank you, Joost, for raising this issue, because it's definitely an ethical issue that we need to deal with. So I just want to share what's happening more recently within the last couple of years in Indonesia. Briefly, all the partners have come together, formed a collaboration called GAPAI. And as a result of this collaboration of well, like 23 denominations and like 27 Bible translation organizations coming together, they developed a means of assessing language vitality currently with what we call Taste of Translation, which is a 2-day thing. So what we did is we looked at all the languages in Indonesia, and they have historical EGIDS factors, but all of us knew that they're historical and, you know, are they accurate or not? And so we didn't pay real attention to them. What we said is we need a current, up-to-date evaluation, and we need to ask the community. We need to work with the community. So Taste of Translation is a 2-day thing where you actually go and do a participatory methods with people from the community. They themselves assess themselves and their own language vitality. And then they're given an opportunity to say, would you like to move forward with Bible translation based on this? And so there are those that are EGID 7 and even 8 that participate in these things. And we've had some on the EGID 7, for example, that said, oh yeah, we really want to do this. We really want to revitalize. And so we said, okay, you're committed. We'll come partner with you. And we've gone ahead and done it. So we haven't written them off. We're actually doing some of those things. But I will tell you of the challenges of that those projects have experienced. They themselves, as we've gone in and trained them. And so what happens is that they've lost a lot of their vocabulary. And what ends up happening is they're developing like a new Creole. So they're borrowing lots of words, lots of concepts, more than just key terms, but just even basic terms, because they can't remember them in their language. Or in some cases, they can't agree. Like people on this side say, no, this is the word. No, this is the word. And they can't, and so instead of bringing the community together, it's just created division. And the way to solve that division is just let's use the word of wider communication. And so it ends up being like a Creole. So efforts are being made in Indonesia to reevaluate all languages and to give opportunity for every community that wants to move forward. But the reality is, in some of these lower languages, it's a real challenge for them to do translation where they've lost a lot of their language.
Thanks, Mark. That's very encouraging to hear. And I think it just puts the emphasis on we need to do it before the elders are all gone. And we almost have to resurrect pigeons and creoles to do this instead of using EGIDs as a way to say, well, let's not invest in these languages.
Yeah, I'm Kirk Person. I do a lot of work representing SIL at UN meetings. And I just wanted to affirm what you were saying about the spirituality thing. Sadly, I have sensed, and I'm actually writing about how the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues has pretty much given up on language. At least the leaders have, to me, in private conversations. But meanwhile, in their large sessions, when they open it up for people to give a 1-minute talk, so many stories of language pain, suffering, and loss. I remember one man who said the only word he knows in his language is the word for God. And he just often cries out, God, God, God. And he was sharing this in front of the whole, hundreds of people at the Permanent Forum. So I think you're really onto something with this link between the spirituality and the connection with the Creator through language. Keep it up.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for very helpful, very eye-opening and presentation. I'm Alan Daniel, lead Progress Bible, and I really think that there is so much that the Bible translation movement can do and should do to really better accomplish what we really are setting out to do, which is bring the word of God to the people. So thank you for helping us see one aspect of what that could be a small change and so forth. One thing I would recommend is just for the BT movement to represent it here, to know that Progress Bible is here. We are here to serve you. We are merely a platform to represent what you want represented. So engage with us and let us know what you want. So thank you.
Thanks a lot. Really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Sure, I'm open.
Yeah, Jeff Webster with Seed Company. I'll be really short. Just to say, from Seed Company's perspective and deciding which languages to support, we don't really look at EGIDs. We don't write a language off if it's a 7. So if there's a desire from the local community or a community or a group working with that community for a scripture, we'll consider it. I've got a project in Nepal right now that's just started. 2 of those languages are EGID 7, so we don't write them off.
Super. Let's keep this up.
I'm Vincent Nyoni from Zimbabwe. Right, thank you very much for your presentation on looking at diversity as an antidote to godless exploitation of languages. Now, I just want to find out probably your experience and also maybe from these other members to say, when we are doing this work as we are promoting, especially the marginalized languages. Now we have had a situation where the bigger languages have been dominating. Now, these other smaller languages, as they try to come aboard, they then probably assume also the status of marginalizing the other marginalized languages. So I'm not so sure whether you could be having similar issues in your place or even amongst the audience. I come from Zimbabwe. I'm saying this is what I've experienced. Thank you.
Yes, very much. In my province, we have this opening statement where we acknowledge that we stand on the unceded territory of whatever the First Nations was there before the settlers came in. And so now First Nations are asserting the fact that this is unceded territory, so they want legal right to this land. All right, this makes all the settlers and myself, all non-First Nations people, nervous. All right, and so then suddenly what's going to happen to my house in very concrete terms? And so, yes, absolutely. You know, I think that's one of the things where you have the ideal, you have utopia in heaven, where you have all the multilingual groups working together actually in their different languages and different identities. And I think that is something that we as a church need to enmesh ourselves in so that we can show how it's done instead of just asserting that the dominant languages should be dominant, but we need to show how we can do it together with all the different language groups, whether they're strong or weak, whether in a power position or not in a power position. So thank you.
Is everyone coming?